Thanks, Ken Corla. Obviously, the war in the former Yugoslavia were profoundly shocking between 1991 and 1995, and again, of course, from 1998 to 2001 for the whole of Europe, indeed for the whole world. And this time, 22 years ago, in July 1995, of course, the appalling events of the breakdown of the Yugoslav Federation was, I suppose, most epitomised by the mass murder of more than 8,000 young Bosnian men and boys around the town of Srebrenica. And I recall, last Can, as you probably would yourself, that the sadness and anger felt in this House when deputies first got a chance to raise those appalling events. I remember a particularly important intervention by the former Minister and Deputy Shatter. So it's right, we should once again tonight remember these tragic victims of genocide in the House and resolve that such cruel and devastating crimes should never be allowed to happen again. And of course, accountability is very important, as Deputy Boyd Barrett has said, and those responsible for such crimes, of course, should always be held to account, as of course happened to some of the perpetrators of the atrocities in the former Yugoslavia. And of course, today, every day of the week, we can see events in places like Mosul and Aleppo and South Sudan and East Congo, which also fill us with horror, and where clearly the necessity to greatly reform and restructure the United Nations is really incumbent on us to proceed with that, given the continued history of failure. And clearly the European Union and the UN failed badly in addressing the rise of atavistic nationalism and racism, which provoked the breakup of Yugoslavia and the manner in which the constituent republics and areas separated. Germany and Austria in particular, I recall, seemed to encourage the breakaway of Slovenia and later Croatia without any consideration for the fragile interethnic and intercultural tensions within the former Yugoslavia, where once, of course, the Croatian-born leader Josip Broz Tito, he made his federation, I suppose, a leading non-aligned state. And I recall, of course, in also Dublin Bay North, quite a number of refugees and families from the from Bosnia-Herzegovina came to our constituency and country, and many of course the families who came here last Can had connections in all three communities, and what was particularly sad, of course, was memories of Orthodox, Serb, Muslim, Bosnian and Croatian Catholics living very peacefully beside each other and socialising easily together before they were engulfed in this Holocaust. It has to be said, of course, that the cost of the horrendous mayhem and murder in former Yugoslavia remains a stain on Europe down to today. And the Conservative estimates, of course, of the death toll, at least 140,000, with at least 100,000 people dying in Bosnia and Herzegovina, of which 14,000 alone died in the siege of Sarajevo, are truly appalling figures. And the fact that 2 million people, of course, were displaced and 2.5 million refugees, the treatment of women and children, with up to 50,000 rapes of mainly Muslim Bosnian women, was also an appalling stain on the recent history of Europe. But Srebrenica in July 1995, of course, stands out as a depraved crime of genocide comparable with some of the worst events in World War II. The Srebrenica enclave, of course, was under intense attack from 1992-93, and despite the Security Council declaring it a safe area in 1993, the lawless and intense violence from the Bosnian Serb army intensified in early 1995. The failure of UN Profor to protect the residents of Srebrenica and refugees in Potakari between the 6th and the 11th of July, and subsequently remains an indictment of the organisations and the structure of the UN. And of course, the NATO was similarly very badly at fault. The massacre of more than 8,000 Bosnian men and boys, of course, were perpetrated by units of the Bosnian Serb army, the VRS, under the command of General Ratko Mladic, and the former Serbian paramilitary group, the Scorpions, were also involved. And the two Bosnian Serb leaders, Radovan Karadzic and Momcilo Krajnik, of course, pressed on with the genocidal attack on Srebrenica. The previous deputy mentioned, of course, the former president of Croatia, Franjo Tuđman, who managed not to be indicted, but who the history of the appalling carnage in Yugoslavia, in the former Yugoslavia, would seem that should definitely have been indicted. And of course, it's entirely fitting, of course, that Radovan Karadzic, Ratko Mladic, and indeed after his loss in the Serbian presidential election in 2000, Slobodan Milosevic, that they were all indicted for this crime of genocide. But I suppose tonight, we do need accountability, and accountability, I suppose, on this appalling event, which nobody would have thought could have happened so recently in Europe. But it's also a night to remember the victims and their families and the great suffering, and the fact that clearly we have to ensure that this kind of horrendous events never happen, not just in Europe but anywhere on this planet again. Thanks, Can.